Privyet! Tally-ho, Joolz Guides here, in which I wander around London and tell you fascinating facts. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you enjoy the videos. Now, I don't know what the average person knows about Vladimir Lenin, but if I had to guess, I'd probably say he was bald, he was Russian, head of the communist Soviet Union after leading the Russian Revolution in 1917 and having the Russian royal family assassinated. But I bet you didn't know many of the people who were instrumental in plotting the Russian Revolution resided here in London, and a lot of the plans were made right here. Okay, now look, you're gonna have to bear with me because this is quite complicated, but it's really important because Lenin is one of the most iconic characters of the whole 20th century, if not history. I mean, you can even go and still see his embalmed body there in Moscow in his mausoleum. Now, you see, at the end of the 19th century, Russia was falling behind the rest of Europe politically. They didn't have a constitution, there was no parliament, and all the power was with the Tsar, who was like the king, the royal family. And so all these little underground secret political movements started up. And Lenin's one was called the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. Now, as you can imagine, plotting revolutions was pretty much against the law. And so Lenin ended up doing a lot of time in prison, in labour camps. He was exiled in Siberia for a while, but eventually he escaped and he ended up in London. You see, Lenin wanted to get rid of these stupid rich aristocrats and get the working man in the street to rise up and crush the posh ruling class. But he didn't have Facebook and he didn't have Twitter, so the only way he could do it was by publishing this newspaper called Iskra. And the best place for him to do this was here in London, where he could then smuggle his newspaper back into Russia. But I'm no expert, so I've enlisted the help of my friend Margarita, who runs Lenin in London tours, and she arranged to meet me on a very miserable grey day outside Charing Cross Station. Margarita, excellent. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, Joolz.
And why have you brought me to Charing Cross Station on this rainy, miserable day?
Well, on a day just like this one, back in 1902, Lenin came to London with his wife, Nadia Krupska, and this was the first thing that they saw when they came to London. His wife Nadia was really good. She put very detailed diaries, and she remembers, although the weather was filthy on the day they arrived, the face of Lenin brightened up and he started looking at this citadel of capitalism with curiosity.
Now, when Lenin was in London, he published 18 works, and he spent a lot of time at the British Library. And you're probably thinking, why am I standing outside the British Museum? Well, the British Library used to be in the British Museum. They had this wonderful reading room, and Lenin was really impressed by this reading room because he could get all sorts of books and publications, things like by Karl Marx and stuff that had been banned in Russia. Now, you must know Karl Marx, right? The guy with the big beard buried in Highgate Cemetery. And he was yet another one of these social revolutionaries who ended up living in London after being booted out of Germany. In fact, this is where he wrote the Communist Manifesto.
Well, yeah, Karl Marx inspired Lenin a lot, and his work Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital. Lenin was reading all his books in British Library, and interestingly, Karl Marx used to work in British Library too, and they were in the same room, but a few decades apart. And there is still Lenin's reading ticket in the archives of the library, issued in 1902. But interestingly, there is no mention of Lenin on the ticket. He used name Jacob Richter when he lived in London, and this is the name that you can find on his reading ticket.
Lenin said, "The British bourgeoisie do not spare any money as far as this institution is concerned, and that is as it should be." Sorry, that's supposed to be a Russian accent. Lenin had quite a few residences around this area. I mean, we're just in Russell Square, Bloomsbury. It's really nice around this area. He really seems to have known how to look after himself. But most of them have been bombed or they're not there anymore, most of the places he lived. But there is one that is still exactly the same as it was when he lived there, down here in Tavistock Place. And I find it amazing that Lenin would have walked this route many, many times on his way back here.
Every single day, yeah. So here we are, 36.
at least this one, his house is still here.
Yes, this is the original house. Lenin stayed here on one of his later visits in London. And it's very conveniently located, just 5 minutes away from British Library. It was essential for him to have access to the library. It was essential for him to have access to the place where the newspaper was published. So he had to stay in this location.
Yes, it wasn't that long ago, really. That's the bit that amazes me.
Yeah, just a bit more than 100 years ago, so it's nothing. 3 generations.
I mean, this whole area was full of these revolutionaries. I mean, some bloke over there, some other Rusky. What was his name? There's a blue plaque over there as well.
It's Alexander Herzen, who also lived in the same area as Lenin, but 50 years earlier. He also came to London to publish an underground magazine to smuggle it to Russia. So he was doing basically the same job as Lenin was doing then later.
I can't believe how many of these revolutionaries there were in London. It's another one. Obviously, we didn't have a problem with it. These lovely houses along here, Sidmouth Street, I mean, these are still the same as they were back in Lenin's time. There aren't many of them left in this street. But in order to publish this newspaper, it was called Iskra. His editorial board stayed in a flat around here. So they were living in this street, so it would have been a house like this.
Yeah, it wasn't just Lenin, it was his wife and a bunch of other members of the party and also members of the editorial board who came here and who actually resided on these streets and organized the first Russian socialist commune in London.
But Lenin didn't stay with him, did he?
Oh, he didn't want to stay with them. They were noisy, they were messy, they had guests all the time. And Lenin wanted his quiet place, just his room, his books. He didn't want to be part of that messiness.
We're here in Perse Circus, just sort of around the back of Gray's Inn Road, heading up towards Islington. It's just such a lovely little area around here. I don't usually come down here, but I love the houses and everything, and obviously Lenin did as well. Because, I mean, this isn't the actual house, because obviously that got bombed by the Luftwaffe, but yet another residence of Lenin. What I find weird about this whole thing is that all these revolutionaries were exiled and came over to England to seek refuge because they couldn't hatch their plans in Germany or Russia or whatever. And yet, when the king's own cousin, the Tsar Nicholas II, he wanted to come over, but they wouldn't accept him.
Yeah, basically when Lenin came to power, a couple of years on, they just assassinated the whole royal family. And they wanted to escape. The Tsar and his family wanted to escape, and they asked England to let them come here. But they couldn't come, and it's just the most heartbreaking bit of Russian history, I guess.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It was his cousin as well. I mean, they look identical, by the way. King George V and the Tsar Nicholas II look identical. And the Kaiser as well. Wasn't the Kaiser of Germany? There's another cousin.
They were all related, and the wife of Nicholas II, she was the favorite granddaughter of Queen Victoria.
I mean, I thought I had a dysfunctional family. I mean, King George V, he was at war with one of his cousins, that was the Kaiser, and he let the other cousin be assassinated, the Tsar. I bet Christmas is a bundle of laughs around their place. You see, now I know a little bit about Lenin, but what was his problem with the aristocracy anyway? I mean, I thought he was like from quite a noble family himself.
Yeah, he was from a middle class and he was very well educated. And it was in the university where he and also his brother, they got radicalized and they got inspired by ideas of Karl Marx.
See, I read that when Lenin was only 15, his father died of a brain hemorrhage, and then his brother tried to assassinate the Tsar, and then he got caught and he was hanged. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine what that must have been like for someone aged 15.
Oh yes, and it deeply affected Lenin, who was a younger brother. It's a very tragic childhood that he had, and he wanted to give more rights to people, which sounds like a very noble thing to do, but he really took his ideas to the extreme. And it wasn't just about the workers in Russia. It was the global movement. He wanted people who actually produce stuff to be able to enjoy the rights that other people have.
Truda.
Excellent.
Meaning what?
The collective of communistic labor.
Oh, okay. So so there's something about the artwork from the time that I like. That definitely says Lenin. They say L-E-N.
Yes, it does.
But I quite like the artwork from the era. I love those big sculptures and stuff like that. And you've got a bunch of badges. Badges! We don't need your stinking badges.
With all sorts of Lenins. These two of particular interest. So this star with this, baby Lenin on top of
Oh,
it.
baby Lenin. He's even got hair there. Check him out. Can you see that, Simon?
This is what you would get if you were Oktyabryonek, which was the first step of getting into, communist system. And as you got older, you could become a pioneer.
Pioneer?
And you would get this Lenin, saying always ready, всегда готов. And then moving on, progressing to Komsomolets, you would then be able to become a member of the Communist Party, which was essential if you wanted any career in Soviet Union.
So whilst he was alive, he had pictures of him that people could wear. A bit self-indulgent, no?
Some of them, not all of them, but some of them.
Like, hey, here's a picture of me for you to wear.
That's what you do, though.
How dare you? I have a silhouette that is available on my merchandising. Now, just around the corner from Perse Circus is Lenin Court, and yet another one of the locations where Lenin lived. Now, it didn't look like this back in 1902 because thanks to the Luftwaffe again, it was a beautiful old terrace of houses back then. But this is still a really cool building, by the way, so you have to come and check it out. I recommend it. Oh, thanks.
If you get a lift up to the 6th floor and walk down as well, you get all the views over them.
Okay, thanks. And it's designed by Bertold Romanovich Lubetkin. He also designed the Penguin Pool.
Built in the London Zoo.
In London Zoo?
Yeah, he did.
And the Gorilla House. And High Point, actually, in Highgate. Now, when Bertold Romanovich Lubetkin, he was Georgian, he first designed this, it was actually called Lenin Court because it had a bust of Lenin outside. But then later, when the Cold War came along, it wasn't such a popular idea to have busts of Lenin knocking around. So they decided to rename the place Bevin Court after Ernest Bevin, who was a staunchly anti-communist Minister for Foreign Affairs. He's the guy whose bust is now downstairs. So this is a really significant place in the whole of the Russian Revolution history.
This place defined the history of Russia, I would say. Because this is the place where we are standing now, maybe not this floor, but like the place where Lenin lived, was the place where he met Trotsky for the first time. And Trotsky was the guy, for those who do not know, who alongside Lenin was the mastermind of the Great October Revolution. Trotsky arguably played even a more significant role in organizing the whole thing. He knew Lenin, they were sending letters to each other for a while by then, but it was the first time they actually met in person. And when Trotsky, back in the days, he was just like in his early 20s, he came to London, he had no money, he couldn't speak any English at all, but he knew the address where Lenin was living, so he took a cab and he came here. It was very late and early in the morning. Lenin's wife was still in her sleeping gown. She opened the door and she saw Trotsky. And he didn't care that he woke her up. He only cared that she had money to pay for his cab.
Well, that's a bit much. I mean, he just called on this bloke he's never actually met before. His wife answers the door. Who the hell are you? Middle of the night. Oh, by the way, you can get the cab. Right, now where's the kitchen? I'm going to make myself some tea. What the hell?
After the revolution, Trotsky becomes in charge of the Great Terror that took away lives of tens of thousands of people, that became the base of all the repressions and all the nasty things during Stalin's times. It all started with Red Terror and Trotsky. Like throughout the whole history of Soviet Union, there were so many waves of terror, and it was just first of many. And Trotsky, the guy who came here, was the one who implemented it.
This is their Westminster. Disgusting.
When Lenin was showing Trotsky around London, they came past the river here, and he pointed out the House of Parliament, and he said, this is their Westminster. And later on, Trotsky wrote that by emphasising the word their, it was really clear that he didn't mean this is the British people's Westminster. What he was talking about was this is the ruling class's Westminster. Whilst Lenin was in London, he liked to go to the zoo. He also went to Speaker's Corner. Don't forget to watch my amazing video about Speaker's Corner. And he also liked to go to the music hall in order to rub shoulders with the working class.
And as his wife remembers in her diaries, he would go with them to the markets, he would go with them to the protests, and in other places that Lenin loved to visit were pubs, like this one, Water Red's pub.
It looks like a new pub. Is this rebuilt?
Yeah, it was rebuilt. The original pub was called Pinder of Wakefield.
The Pinder of Wakefield. I don't know what a Pinder is. What's a Pinder? The Pinder of Wakefield. Well, and he used to come here. So I imagine him sitting there with his pint of beer and like...
Well, Well, we don't really know if he was much of a drinker. He definitely went to pubs, but I couldn't find any evidence in diaries of his wife of him consuming alcohol, but probably it's because of propaganda.
What? I mean, he better not have just been drinking water. I'm not having that.
Bob Dylan played here. One of his first gigs in London was at this very place, and now on, like every single night they have a gig or they have a stand-up comedian. It's a wonderful place. It used to be bed and breakfast in 19th century, and one important communist used to reside here. It was Karl Marx. He was renting room in this very building. And yeah, interestingly, again, a few years later, Lenin would come here to have a pint of tap water, obviously.
Now, I can't say for certain that Lenin didn't order a couple of pints of beer, but it is true that he did see alcohol as a tool of bourgeoisie oppression. And after the revolution, he did actually ban vodka.
My guess is that he was still drinking beer, but they just, left it behind them.
We're up in Angel Islington now. Just round the corner from the station is this pub, the Three Johns. And in 1903, this is a really significant location in the history of the Russian Revolution, because this was where the Second Congress of the Russian Socialist Democratic Labour Party, Judean People's Front of Judea, whatever. It took place here. And there was a very, very important vote that took place. So let's go inside. Lenin wrote that a meeting he had in this pub marked the birth of Bolshevism. I like to think that it was in this back room maybe where they all met up, because they were having these secret meetings in all sorts of hidden locations around London, and they didn't always agree on how things should be done. There were various groups within the party, and there was the Bolsheviks, who was like Lenin's party, known as the Hards, and then there was the Mensheviks, led by Martov, who were the Softs, although they didn't actually have those names yet.
The Bolsheviks were really hard ones. They believed in revolution, they believed in dictatorship, they wanted to do things quickly. While Mensheviks, they were really softer. They were more reformists and they believed in democracy in a way.
So everyone ended up having to vote and decide whether they were going to be with Lenin or Martov. But actually, Lenin lost the vote, and the majority of people voted for Martov and the Softs.
But Lenin was a genius of marketing. He called their gang Bolsheviks, which means majority, and Mensheviks mean minority.
That's cunning. So after the meeting that they had in this pub, the party split and they decided to start doing things their own separate ways.
Well, basically, they carried idea that there was no unity in the party since then, and they chose revolution over reforms, dictatorship over democracy.
Right here. It happened right here. It's so sad, really. I'm sure that in every Joolz Guides video, there is a pub that is no longer a pub. And this used to be called the Crown and Wolf Pack. It's now a hairdresser. But around 1905, Scotland Yard got wind of the fact there was going to be a meeting of social revolutionaries in this pub. So they sent their best guy for the job. And he went inside and he hid inside a cupboard upstairs.
Sometime later, a group of socialists started their meeting. They were there for 1 hour, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was such a long meeting. And poor agent was sitting there in a cupboard, listening carefully to every single word. Finally, they left. And the poor agent had to go back to Scotland.
Report back to base.
It was a disaster. It was a disaster for his career, yes, because he couldn't report anything. He didn't speak any Russian.
Oh, right, of course, the whole thing was in fluent Russian. But at least the pub did all right out of it.
You'd be surprised they didn't, because those Russian guys, they were just sitting there occupying the room, but they hardly ordered any food or drinks.
Drinking water? You said, I told you they're just there drinking water. It's outrageous. Why weren't they just at least buying a few pints? You know what they're like? They probably had their laptops out as well. They're like those guys who go into a cafe and buy one espresso.
And they brought their own bottle with water.
Yeah, exactly. And they sit there with their laptops and they stay there all day. And I go in there. Well, now on the corner of Fulbourn Street over there, you see that building? And that used to be the Jewish Socialist Club. That is the exact building where they had to sign up in 1907 for this Congress. It was the, now, oh my God, you're going to have to help me. It was the
5th Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. And all the key folks were there. Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, Litvinov, Martov, and even Gorky, Maxim Gorky, supporter of the party and the famous Russian writer.
Gorky, as in the writer, as in I followed the Moskva down to Gorky Park. That must be named after Gorky, right?
Exactly.
Gorky Park, yeah.
That guy.
Right, so, but this isn't actually the place where the conference took place. That took place down near Haggerston in an old church, which is no longer there now. They've turned it into a Tesco, so and we're not going to go down there. But I wonder if this is the very door where they all walked in at. Do you reckon? They could have been this very door. It was all a bit secretive, you know, because if you were wandering around in the East End back at the beginning of the 20th century, the chances are you would have bumped into some of these revolutionaries who were all hanging around here. There were Latvian activists, Polish activists. Who were all these people who were?
They had these conferences every 2 or 3 years. They would gather together, and there were all different things, like from housekeeping, like how do we run the party, what are, like, you know, the admin side of things. And like, don't forget, they were not just plotting Russian revolution. That's why Scotland Yard was so invested into spying on them, because they were talking about, like, you know, something global, something that would change the history of the whole world.
One of the main things that they started arguing about was what they were going to call the conference, because I think the Mensheviks or something said, oh no, you can't call it the 5th conference, it's got to be the 4th conference or something like that, because your previous one wasn't an official conference, and they had this big, massive argument about it.
So who are you then?
We are members of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party.
Get lost, bloody splitters. We're the Russian Socialist Democratic Workers' Union Party.
What happened to the Socialist Democratic Workers' Union Party?
Oh, he's over there. This used to be, we're in Fieldgate Street, next to Tayyab's, by the way, which is an excellent Punjabi restaurant. I highly recommend this.
I can smell it.
Oh,
Yes.
it's amazing smell, isn't it?
10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I can smell it quite fine.
It makes you so hungry. But this tower house, which is now, of course, luxury flats, it used to be the Doss House. And this is the place where Stalin stayed in London when he first came here. Now, Joseph Stalin, in case you didn't know, was the one who took over leadership of the Soviet Union after Lenin died in 1924, and he ruled for 29 years, overseeing the Great Purge, in which millions of enemies of the working class were imprisoned or executed. You've probably seen pictures of him during the Second World War next to Churchill and Roosevelt. Let's just say you wouldn't want to piss him off. I find it amazing, Simon. I find it extraordinary that Stalin, one of the most notorious leaders, stayed in this Doss House here. It's amazing. I wonder which window it was. Someone today is living in that room where Stalin stayed. Can you imagine? It's a bit much, isn't it, the way that Lenin, he used to walk through the East End and showing his friends around, pointing out the differences, the gaps between the classes. Look at those rich people, look at how these poor people are living over here. And meanwhile, Stalin's in this place and he's over in Bloomsbury in a lovely flat. I mean, I can't believe it. It's a bit out of order, that, isn't it? Right, but Stalin was quite badass. I mean, Lenin had him robbing banks and stuff like that, didn't he? I mean,
Well, when you need to finance the revolution, you do all sorts of things. And yes, Stalin was involved in a massive, massive robbery.
there was a story I heard about Stalin when he was wandering along by the river, like the Thames or something, and there was a beautiful Irish lady, and he quite fancied her, and so he started trying to chat her up. But her male companions weren't too happy about this, so they started to beat the crap out of him.
But what I heard about this story is that Litvinov, another member of the party, was there to help Stalin and saved his life after the fight. And that Litvinov guy, a few years on, he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Russia, and he stayed close to power for a really long time. And some people think that it was because he saved Stalin's life that Stalin didn't prosecute him, because he prosecuted pretty much everyone in his circle.
Well, he could have, the whole of history could have been changed. If he had just stood back, if he was a coward like me, this Litvinov bloke, he just stood back and went, yeah, just beat him up and had him killed, the whole of history could have been changed. Yeah. And he stayed here as well. Litvinov was in here as well.
Yeah.
Please mind the gaps between the trains and the platform.
Originally, at that propeller-shaped building that we went to, the Lubetkin one, originally there was a bust of Lenin there, and now they say that he might have that the original one was moved to this museum. It's a really cool museum, actually. You've got to come here, the Islington Museum.
When I take my Russian tourists to see Lenin, many of them are like, we've seen statues like this everywhere you go. There is still Lenins everywhere. But it's quite remarkable to see something like this, you know, in the Western Bloc. It's a very, very, very rare thing to see a bust of Lenin that didn't come from Russia, that was put, you know, here in London specially and made specially for London.
Here on Clerkenwell Green is the Karl Marx Memorial Library, and back in 1902 this was the publishing house for a local Labour newspaper called Justice, and they offered their facilities and services to Lenin so he could publish his Iskra, which means...
It means spark, because they were about to spark the revolution across the globe. That was their job. So basically Lenin spent a lot of time in this building just working on the Iskra, and if you're ever inside this building you can actually find some old issues of the Iskra newspaper that are still there.
Wow, look! This is the actual room he edited the Iskra in. Lenin, founder of the USSR, edited Iskra in this room, 1902. It's amazing. Lots of images of himself, of course. I don't think they were there when he was here. But look at the actual copy here. This is original. Amazing. Oh, there they are, the usual suspects. There's Litvinov there at the top right. Yes, it looks so different when they were young. And this is the map showing the route that they smuggled Iskra out of London into Russia. It's amazing.
It's one of the largest archives of literature on, you know, communism, Leninism, Marxism, in all different languages. But this building is a sign that it's pretty much alive, and they have events discussing the rights of working class, Marxism today, all sorts of things. So what Lenin was doing here in London is still very, very, very relevant these days.
And by lucky hap, 'tis a stone's throw from the Karl Marx Memorial Library to the Crown Tavern.
Oh, it's actually another really crucial meeting for Russian history. It's where Lenin and Stalin shared a meal.
Lenin and Stalin, two of history's most important leaders, drinking in this very pub. It's amazing, really.
Don't forget that these guys, Lenin was in his 30s, Stalin was in his 20s, Trotsky was in his 20s. They're like really young gang of people, passionate about their views. They would go to a pub, sometimes they would fight, sometimes they would come to an agreement. And there is one place in Finland that says, well, actually, they were together in Finland a couple of years before that.
Well, the Finns can claim they first met in Finland if they like, but I'm sticking with the Crown. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the fact that they actually met here at all is amazing. Cheers, Dimitri. Thanks very much. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like the videos. And if you want to know more about me, you can go to joolzguides.com and follow me on my Instagram, which is @JoolzGuidesOfficial. And if you want a guided tour of Lenin's London, don't contact me. Contact Margarita at lenin.london. Excellent. See you next time, folks. Cheers, cheers, cheers.